Good evening, and welcome to Issues. Today we have with us BrianDarby, master journalist, and we're going to talk to him about freedom of the press, a very unique subject and a very timely one. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you.
Happy to have you with us. Give us a little bit of your background history in terms of journalism. How did you get to be the master journalist that you are?
Well, I disagree with that to start with, but it's such a long story. I'm 52 years of journalism. I'm not going to bore you with it, but suffice to say, I was born in Bermuda in the dockyard. My father was a naval officer, and he decided that life was too boring in Bermuda. So around about 1942, he decided to go and take the family back to England and fight the war. And he was a clergyman, so that was slightly unusual. And so I went from this paradise to war, and those are my early memories. But when we all grew up, and I discovered that I was good at English, and I was encouraged at school. So when the day came around about 16, when they said, "Where are you going from here?" I went down to a newspaper in the village and volunteered my services. And because it was summer and they needed help, I got a job as an apprentice, and for 5 years at 4 guineas a week, I laboured as a junior journalist, and I learnt the trade. And there's nothing to beat that in any profession. There's nothing to beat being a junior apprentice or whatever at the beginning of your life. And it takes all the cockiness out of you, and you learn the trade. And from that moment onwards, I've been a devoted journalist. It's my career, it's my religion, it's my everything.
Wow. Now, your present position with DeFonts Television, how did that come about?
I've been there 20 years now, but I used to work for the Gazette, Mid-Ocean, Sun, ZBM, you name it. I've worked for it. I've been Public Relations Director of the government, of the Southampton Princess, the Chamber of Commerce, of the hospital. I've been a bit of Johnny-come-lately type person. I've been everywhere. I've done it all, and learnt something each time. And here at 73 years old, I'm enjoying being an ordinary communal garden, what they call an electronic journalist.
So from the age of 16, that's when journalism began for you.
There's nothing else in my life.
Wow. Now let's look at freedom of the press. In terms of the press, the local press here in Bermuda, how much influence do you believe it has over its public?
As much as the public will take. In Bermuda, we have I would say, a softly approach to news. We don't have agendas as such. Very few of us have agendas.
Some people would disagree with that.
Sometimes there are reporters with agendas. English reporters are taught to go for the groin, and to be aggressive and look for the bad story. For example, if a bank has done very well and its 4-page press release comes out, instead of writing the first 3 pages, which is all plus, they look down and down until they can find something negative. And they report that as the lead story, and it upsets people. But they've been trained to do that. There's an ethos in England, and perhaps to a certain extent in Canada and America, where journalists are only good if they find the dirt. And that, unfortunately, has flowed over to Bermuda to a certain extent, but not as much as people might think. We're pussycats, to be honest with you.
Negative news, does it sell more newspaper? Does it get more viewers than positive news?
It's that wonderful saying that Bill Zool came up with a few months ago. He said, if a ferry runs on schedule, that's not news. And so you don't write stories on the front page. The ferry is running on time. When it doesn't run on time, if it breaks down, it's got poor maintenance, that's taxpayers' money at stake. That's people's livelihood going to work at stake. It's a bad story. We would report that because it's news. But public want to know why, and we tell them. We are the messenger.
Now, the Bermudian Constitution Does it have any guidelines? Does it have any directives in terms of what the media can report? Are there any handcuffs put on the media because of the Constitution?
Only through the common garden laws of a country. This is not just Bermuda. Every country's got a constitution. And in some constitutions of some countries, there is no press freedom at all. And we're all familiar with countries that have got that blight. In some countries, to a certain extent America, there's huge freedom of press. You can go into people's records and the government has to tell you what it's said about things and produce the reports after so many years. You have a freedom of access to information. We're getting there. There's a small change in Bermuda where you can now get information from the archives.
Is that good or bad?
I think it's time wasting, to be honest with you, unless you know what you're looking for. This is not as secretive a country as people might think. It's there. It's always been run as a kind of civil service country. So the documents are there if you want to look for them. No one seems to hide anything, but being civil servants, they don't want to be seen in a bad light. So perhaps things that go wrong don't get written up and put in a file quite the way that the good things do. But it's the press's job to winnow it out and find out if someone has been a bad boy.
Now, we have one main daily newspaper. In a country the size of Bermuda, is one enough, or do you need more in really to see what's happening out there? Can one newspaper, can it skew the view as to what's taking place in the community?
Well, that's two questions. First question, the Royal Gazette, if that's the one paper you're referring to, is the survivor of many more. The Recorder, Mid-Ocean News. You're too young to remember when Toddings ran an afternoon edition of the Mid-Ocean. Yes, but I'm serious. It was a long time ago. But we had newspapers coming out of our ears in the old days, and up to today, the Gazette has survived by the skin of its teeth. And despite some weird political chicanery by Dr. Hewitt Brown in taking the advertising away from a newspaper, $800,000 as a political punishment, that I've never seen before in the history of Bermuda. That really gets to my heart. You don't play with your one newspaper. Whatever you think of the way it covers you, you don't punish it. Or you shouldn't punish it. But that's the paper we've got. It's the best we've got. If we don't like it, we don't buy it. Or we write letters to the editor saying, this is rubbish. And it's our paper. It's not their paper. There are journalists who work there who are independently minded. They're decent people. They're not corrupted by anybody. They're not ordered to do things by people. And yet we look at the Royal Gazette sometimes, politically, as a kind of agenda, a conspiracy. When things start getting down to that level, I wouldn't work in journalism.
Okay, I see. So it's based on what I hear you saying, it's unfortunate when politics or government gets involved in terms of trying to hush what's printed in the newspaper. Let me ask this. Does the freedom of the media, can it cross over and impinge on the right of the individual at times?
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay.
It's not a deliberate thing. If you cover a court case, you've got a family in your hands sometimes, and whatever you publish in the paper with the names and the circumstances, people's lives are ruined. But that is not a decision of the Royal Gazette or VSB or ZBM. That's freedom of democracy. Someone does something wrong, you put him in court, and part of the punishment is to be publicized. Don't start killing the messenger, which is probably my favorite expression. It's our job to publish the fact that someone has erred and been punished by society. That's what life is about.
So you see it then as the consequence as to what the individual did. The news being printed, the news being shown on the television or reported on the radio. If the individual feels put off by it, it's the consequence of their earlier actions.
If he's been found guilty and has done something seriously, the society can't live without law. And we're part of the machine. We're part of the punishment. One thing I will say, and I've always objected to, and fortunately it's stopped, is that we used to cover people coming out of vans and other ways going into a magistrate's court before they'd even been charged or become found guilty. We would photograph defendants. It was a kind of weird ethos that the press here does, and they do it all over the world, the paparazzi approach. But here we'd have perfectly decent cameramen who should be out doing something a little bit more decent, spending their mornings filming miscreants going into court and out again, and putting that picture on the news at night and on the front page of the paper. I've always felt very uncomfortable about that because A, the man hasn't been found guilty yet, and you know what he looks like. Immediately you've got a name and a face, and part of society says, oh yeah, so he's a baddie, and he hasn't even had his day in court. So we stopped doing that. It was something that we all looked at. We did it because the other guy did it. We had to be with him, not with the Gazette would have the picture on the front page, ZBM would have the picture on the news, we'd have the picture on the news. It's professional pride. But it stopped, and I'm very happy that we don't do that anymore because they built a new courtroom that you can't photograph people. And I'm quite relieved.
But even with that filming of the defendant or the one that's going into court, could that be considered, that's the consequence of him or her being in a certain environment, that's the consequence of, at the present time, whatever he did or she did may seem like they did it. Could that be viewed as the consequence of their action, or the consequence of being thought of being in the wrong place at the wrong time?
Well, coming out convicted, it's in no one's game. You've been convicted, you're fair game.
Okay.
Going into court before justice has prevailed is, I've always thought, disgusting and unfair, and we stopped doing it. So something's getting better somewhere.
Yeah, I really never thought about that, but that is quite interesting, because if you see them going into the court, in your mind you might automatically think, well, they may be guilty. So
and the jury are really the ones that I feel badly for. For example, if there was a murder and 4 people were arrested, next morning we're there with our cameras, 4 people are brought in to be charged with the murder. And we photograph them and put them on the front page or on the news. And, so the public looks at them and said, that's them. Well done, the police, you've caught them. And it hasn't even got to court yet.
Good point.
So we do care. We do care.
Here's a question I probably should have asked earlier. Why is freedom of the press important, especially in a relatively small community such as Bermuda with about maybe 60,000 people?
Well, I suppose if I could give you the historical answer to that, I'd be a wise man, but the press has been around for a long time. Let's go back 3,000 years to the Greeks and their words of wisdom. It's been there to tell the public what's going on and give them a chance to explain or give their feelings on subjects of importance. The press is not government, the press is not the public, and the press is not me. It's this wonderful institution that's evolved, for good or for ill, as our mouthpiece. It's the public's right to know. It's the government's right to be heard. It's my right to present the news to you the way I think, through experience and hopefully trust, that you need to know this. And I don't back off it.
Right. Thank you. We have with us this evening BrianDarby. On the opposite side of being interviewed this time, we're interviewing him instead of him interviewing someone else. We'll be right back after this word. Welcome back. Today we're talking with BrianDarby, master journalist. He disagrees with the term master, but I'm sure those of us viewing would attribute the term master to his journalistic ability. Mr. Darby, on the weekends, how much news do we have on the weekends? Does the media cover what's happening on the weekends?
If you're prepared to make the effort, yes.
Yeah.
We have 2 radio broadcasts on Saturday. We have 2 radio broadcasts on Sunday, 8:15 and 12:15 on Saturday, 10:15 and 12:15 on Sunday.
This is
Defonts
yeah.
only, and it's on 1450 and it's on 106. We also put that news on the satellite. So you dial into your computer, VSB TV 11, and up will come radio and TV, all the news that we've had in the last 24 hours. And we're only one, Burn News, which I have a lot of respect for, the amount of energy they put into covering everything. It's too much for them. It's an overburdened life they lead, but they manage to put, if you hear the police cars tearing down your driveway, you only have to put on Burn News after an hour or so, and there is the collision or the police raid or whatever. They're very good. So they've kept the island alive at weekends. And Royal Gazette and the Sun run regular online news broadcasts throughout both days. So to say there's no news on the weekend, if something happens, you only have to go to your computer or turn us on the radio, and it's there. And if something really big goes down, and God forbid, we can launch camera teams and put TV on the news as a special report. So there's no missing of, like an election or what have you. We'll be there and we put it on the air. It has to be worth it because everything costs money.
Yeah, very good. Now, recently the government established a governing body to oversee the media. Are you aware or familiar with how...
Oh my God, am I?
Share with us, please.
I've always said it was a good idea, but I wasn't sure what it would come of it. I never thought it would work. I just thought the public deserved it. And Dr. Ewart Brown, my friend, the Premier, former Premier, he had a bug that he wanted something way of controlling the press. And he thought a press council, whatever, would do it. And he gave it the job to the press and said, get yourselves organized. I want a press council. And they lay around and do their usual procrastinations that we're very good at in the press. And nothing got done. So one day he turned around and said to the bunch, if you don't do it by October, a few years ago, I will do it for you. Well, that was a frightening suggestion. So we did it. We got together, and a wonderful guy called Tony McWilliam, who's the editor of The Sun, made it his particular crusade to go and find out how the world did its work, and produced the council that we now have. There are 2 parts to it, and I don't think the public are aware of this. There's an organizing committee that's put the whole thing together and runs it. Has written all the words that have been written. We have our code of what we do and what we can't do. It's all done by professional journalists, and there's a committee on which I sit on behalf of VSB that does a day-to-day operations. We are the people. We have a wonderful lady working with us who takes care of the paperwork. We try to find money from our bosses to pay her, and that's it. Then on top of that level, you do have an appointed council press group, and they're not all press people. About half are retired or senior people, like Charles Webb of VSB is a member of the council, and only because of his professionalism and his background and the respect people have for him. But there are a few other journalists of that ilk, and then there's 5 people who have no hands-on experience with newspapers, and that's the council. So it's not the fox and the chickens that you were worried about. The sad thing is that nobody seems to need us. There hasn't been a major case.
What is this council's mandate?
To take complaints from the public that they have been mishandled and misdealt with by the media. There are a list of things that we must never do, part of our code of practice. And if we do break those rules, the complainant can turn to us and say, those laws, your own laws, have been breached, in my opinion. I want apologies, I want this, I want that. And the only people who have been to us so far was this wonderful guy who does sports in Bermuda network, and he complained about people using his material. And he's a journalist himself, he went to his own council and complained that people were plagiarizing and using his copy. Good point. And then the other people was, unfortunately, Workers' Voice published something that was patently wrong. They were challenged by the person that was offended. We ruled, the council ruled, that the Workers' Voice had offended the constitution and the rules of the council, and we demanded an apology be published on the front page of the Workers' Voice. To this day, they have refused to do it. So as far as that is concerned, they will be expelled from the movement or the group, because if you don't abide by the rules, there's no point you being as part of our group. Workers' Voice, sadly, refused to abide by the dictate that we asked them to do.
Yeah, that leads me to another question. What kind of power, who can enforce whatever the council rules? You mentioned the Workers' Voice. They were expelled or disbarred from the council. Yeah, they were a member, but suppose an ordinary citizen complains and this council makes a ruling. How is that enforced?
Well, by the very fact, if you do not do what you're told to do by your own council, you are removed from the dictate, and it's embarrassing. Very embarrassing, I would have thought, to be told by your peers, you've done wrong, and please apologize. All you have to do, there's no money involved, you don't go to jail, you're asked to publish a correction or a worded statement written for you by the council, so what they want you to say, and you publish it on your front page, and the file is cleared.
Do you know if a citizen would like to contact the council, how does one get in touch with that body?
It has a phone number in the book. I keep calling it the Press Council. It's not, is it? It's called the Media Council.
Media Council.
And I think that's what you'd look for in the phone book. It's a lovely lady called Eben. You met Meredith Eben?
Yes.
She's our guiding secretary, and she takes all the complaints in, and she's an old journalist herself of some repute and experience, so she knows exactly how to handle it, and she's wonderful. So she'll take it, talk to you, arrange for us to meet, or not for us so much as the council to meet, and off we go, and it's not happening enough. But the two times we have used it so far in a year have been instructive.
Yeah, well, it's nice to know that a body or a council is there. If I, as a citizen, feel that I've been maligned somehow by the media, I can come to that council, and you folks can look into it and take some action. Let me ask you, the news at the fonts, how is it decided what news to print, what news to broadcast? How is that decided?
I'm afraid that's my decision, against a certain amount of pressure from others. I'm the news director, and I don't particularly want to be news director, but the way life has gone, I'm the news director. I have a staff of 2.
Large.
So when you're talking about news, don't think of CBS. They've got 300 people working for them. We've got 2 and me, that's 3 people. And every day we sit down with a diary and the life and Bermuda and the press conferences, and we prepare the news. Because it's a lot of news to fill, we have a half-an-hour show. We, the 3 of us, tend to report on just about everything that comes across the desk. It doesn't necessarily become a major story. It'll be a short story if it's not particularly interesting to the public, in our opinion. But if it's a big story, then 2 or 3 minutes will be spent on it, doing it professionally. But we have no idea. On 9 o'clock on a Thursday morning, I had no idea what would come about today. But when I left the office at 5:15 today, we had 12 stories, most of which did not exist at 9 o'clock. And you have to kind of be ready for that. That's the job. go one way, and the phone rings, and you have to drop what you're doing and go somewhere else.
You mentioned the staff of 3. Does this
Journalists.
include journalists?
Yeah.
So does this include your reporters?
Yes, that's it.
It's just
and
3.
a camera girl. That's 4.
Okay.
We have a brilliant engineer comes in the evening and takes all our clips and our stories and puts them into a computer and squirts it up to the TV studio up in Devonshire.
Wow.
And we have people that would read the news. I call them announcers or news readers. They're not journalists. They don't write anything. They're not required to write anything. We write it, they read it, and up on TV in the evening, a gorgeous girl usually comes on, or Peter Cattell, and reads what we write. And it works. It's quite happy.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you started at the age of 16, and you emphasized how important that was in terms of developing your own skills. Now, here in Bermuda, if someone desires to follow you in terms of being a journalist, what is available to them? What would you suggest, or what would you advise them to do?
I wouldn't want to put them off until I mention the salaries, but if you've got to love it, you have got to love it. If you don't care about the news, you're no use to me, because I don't want to have to tell you that's a story. I want you to know it's a story. And
are you born as an individual, born with that, or can they learn that?
You can be, because I was.
Okay.
And a lot of the great journalists, the real journalists of this world who are famous and have done things, will agree that there comes a moment when a bell goes off and you are the darling of the news. You know that the rest of your life is going to be spent gathering news. Good, bad, or indifferent. And I suppose it's like being a nurse. You know, you want to care for people. I want to care for the news and make sure you get the truth as the best I can find.
I interrupted you when you were answering my question in terms of here in Bermuda, what would you advise or suggest to a young person who would like to become a journalist?
You've got to go overseas and study at somewhere like Ryerson or the American system. They now do very good journalistic schools with scholarships and degrees and what have you. You mustn't start cold in Bermuda as a junior and think you can learn it all on the spot, because the world of journalism is so big. It's not just typewriters and radios and newspapers. It's now internet. It's hugely technological now. It's something that kids can handle. I can't handle computers and all this stuff, but they can. They love it. And the world is moving so fast into this technology of everything is there and you can bring it up. We get more stories off whatever it's called, book,
Facebook,
than you could shake a stick at. And it's astonishing. Someone, unfortunately, gets murdered in Bermuda. His face is on Facebook.
Wow,
10 minutes later.
My last question, is there a difference, or have you noticed a difference between the English-trained journalist and the American-trained journalist? And if you've noticed a difference, what is that difference?
If I could turn that question around and say, do I notice a difference between overseas journalists and local journalists? Yes. And it's a constant source of distress to me that we Bermudians are born nice and we do not bite the bullet in this business. We do not want to be in the position where we write about our families or we hurt somebody or we want to do this. We are rather nice people. We are gentle people. You were kind enough to say that I was a gentle person. Well, I am. And I can't go through life hurting people. The thing about that is it sometimes takes the edge off your journalism, and it's very hard to get a Bermudian to really bite the bullet. Foreigners, foreign reporters, it's their natural, they've been brought up to bite the bullet, and they will go for stories that I wouldn't touch with a barge pole. And so, to go back to your question, we've done well from them. Bermuda's been constantly afforded the skills of foreign journalists. What is so distressing is that Bermudians have not been trained or haven't wanted to be trained, or when they have been brought on board, have not been brought under the umbrella of learning with these people. There's still a little bit of division, racial and islander versus foreigner in journalism, and it affects, unfortunately, the need to teach Bermudians the craft and move the foreigners on. You know, you've done your job. Now we've got a Bermudian staff. That would be better for Bermuda in the long run.
Thank you so much. I'm happy that you were able to take time out from your schedule and be with us this evening. We've been talking with BrianDarby on the other side of the microphone this time, and we've had an opportunity of learning quite a bit about him and about the press here in Bermuda. And something that I've learned, news is available in Bermuda on the weekend, as earlier told to us by Mr. Darby. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you on Issues next time.